And so what happened was that I started saying yes to even those type of things and not allowing the illness diagnosis to change my focus. And the focus is really the key, is that whether or not it's an illness within myself or a family member or the economy or a business or whatever it is, what is my focus?
I'm your host, Danny Brassell, and this is the show where we celebrate the positive contributions of individuals throughout our community. It's my joy and my pleasure to have with me today high-performance business and sales coach who's also a speaker and the author of one of my favorite books, How a Beaver Saved My Life. Gary Barnes comes to us all the way from Denver, Colorado today. Thanks so much for making the trip to come here today, Gary.
It's a true privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I know people are already wondering, how a beaver saved my life. Tell us a little bit about how a beaver saved your life, Gary.
You know, it really was a journey. Back in 1988, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And back in 88, there wasn't a lot known about, what to do. In fact, the doctor, the original neurologist, said, get ready, you'll be dead or in a wheelchair in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And my boys were 7 and 9. I didn't want to not see them grow up. I did want to, I'll put it in a positive. I wanted to see them graduate from college, get married, have grandchildren. And so I wanted to visualize something that would actually give me that opportunity. And I was laying in bed one night and I was thinking, okay, what could I visualize? And all of a sudden the picture of a beaver shows up and I'm going, a beaver, give me a break. But it started making sense, because when you're diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, one of the things that many times happens is that people send you everything in the world about the illness. And I didn't want to know anything except for a little bit of the dynamics about the myelin sheaths dissolving, and then they touch and short out. So the beaver made a little bit of an impact, because it turned around, took its tail, and patched up the myelin sheath. And I figured, well, if one beaver's good, more is better. Mm-hmm. I'm a party kind of guy. And so what we ended up doing is having 3 ships of beavers working around the clock, having this great time helping me change my reality. And during this time, I had lost all feelings from the neck down, couldn't write, lost the ability to really walk. If I couldn't see my feet, I'd trip over a line that wasn't there. And so that's where it started. I was just visualizing, but there was another key, is I figured that if they were taking care of me, I had to take care of them. And so I created schools and rec centers and churches and shopping areas and, just everything. So it was that, give and take. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, tell us a bit about your journey to get to that point, because I wanted to get that right out in the open about the beaver. We need to know about the beaver. But you're originally from Southern California. Tell us about growing up in Southern California.
It was a kick. If some of the old TV shows, Not a Wonderful Life, but anyway, that show that showed that 50s type of family, that was my family. Mm-hmm. That between that and Roseanne, with the Afghans. And
well, that's quite a shift there.
Quite a shift. And so it was something that I really am a California kid. I love the ocean. And whenever I come here, I always have to make enough time to get down to the beach and, just get rejuvenated. But one of the things that happened is, as we were raising the boys, we really wanted to raise them more in a rural area, and took a vacation to Denver. And lo and behold, my wife applied for a mid-level management job at a hospital in Denver. 2 weeks later, she was there. And so we did that transition, but Southern California I still deem as, really my hometown, and it's always fun to come back.
Tell us a little bit about your wife, Sharon. How'd you guys meet?
We met in college, and
Where was that?
Loma Linda University, La Sierra campus. Now it's La Sierra University, I believe, in Riverside. And she didn't want to date me, which was really interesting. And She was a senior. Why wouldn't
Yeah,
she?
why?
And she was a senior. I was a freshman. She didn't know. She thought I was older. And our first date was the Christmas program. There was a banquet, and so we went down to Newport Beach. And I came back, and in a month I asked her to marry me. I don't shop. I buy.
That's
and
typical guy.
And so she said yes. And a couple of weeks before the wedding, she had, that question, well, how old are you? And I had just turned 20.
Wow.
And she was 23, and then there was silence because her parents lived in San Diego. For the next 30 miles, there was nothing, and I thought, it's over. But we've been married now 38 years.
Oh, congratulations.
I tell
That's
people
great.
I'm trainable, and we've had all boys.
Yeah, that makes it very good. And tell us about Matt and Chris. Actually, you have a third son too.
We have
Your
a third.
adopted son, Jason. So tell us about Matt, Chris, and Jason.
It's my three sons. My oldest is Matt. He's in chiropractic college, and it's really fun to watch, and they're just great. Chris is my youngest, and he went to school and graduated college because of baseball. And we went around the country just watching baseball.
What position did he play?
Shortstop
Oh, good.
and second base. And it was a lot of fun. But so he has a sports management degree. And that degree obviously aligned with his calling. He's now a youth pastor.
Oh, wow.
Just got his
good.
master's in divinity. And so now he's a youth pastor with a mohawk.
Nice.
So, and then Jason is a graphics designer, and Jason came to us and one day said, could he spend a little more time at the house? And I said, how much?
He was Chris's.
Chris is,
Chris's
yeah, he's a
buddy.
little bit older than Chris, but they went to school. They were either really good friends or really dire enemies. And so he asked if he could spend a little more time, and I said, how much? And he goes, all. And I said, sure. And then he backed his car up and moved in and been with us ever since.
Tell us a little bit about your business background. I'm kind of interested in that, Gary.
My background is theology and psychology. Wow. So I tell people I argued with myself from a very early age. And so obviously from that standpoint, I went into real estate. I know. I went into...
I needed you as my real estate agent. I needed some theology on that.
People just really wonder about me because through this time, I also went through the Sheriff's Academy. I'm a certified police officer. And back in the day, that was
How does one become a certified police officer?
By graduating and not screwing up a lot. You do a lot of push-ups.
Do people become police officers without passing that certification?
No, you have to go through the academy.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to get through. And where you do a lot of interesting things. But police chaplaincy was really where I was going with that. And so there was a connection of sorts. But out of that, I really found that I was a square peg in a round hole because I ask way too many questions. And in most theological organizations, that's really kind of frowned upon.
Really?
Because it's really thought of as here's the truth and this is what the reality is. And I kept asking questions like, why? And that wasn't appreciated.
It's actually the very first question I try to train kids to ask. Is
Absolutely.
Why you should question everything.
That's where you integrate it inside of yourself.
Absolutely.
And so out of that, my mother for years was an escrow officer and had been wanting me to get my real estate license. And so I became a realtor. And my first 10 months in the business made $1,975 in 1976, way back in the day, and I was very proud of that. And my wife said it was gross, and I said, absolutely, we have to take our expenses out of it. But out of that, it morphed into one of the very first financial planning corporations in the country, and ran it for over 30 years.
Wow.
So it really was a journey, but it really is about conversation, building relationships, and everything that I learned early on I use in business every single day and how I coach and deal with people from stage.
And so when you made the move to Colorado with your wife, did you bring the financial planning business with you? Or?
I actually did, and figured that it was a 2-hour drive. We lived in Riverside, and my financial planning clients were about a 2-hour drive from San Diego to Santa Barbara, Palm Springs. I graduated from Palm Springs High, and so I figured, okay, it was a 2-hour flight into Ontario. Well, once you leave the state, people get really nervous. And so I went from a very large income to a very start over income after we moved. And so it really was a do-over once we went to Colorado and had to reapply all my basic principles again.
We'll talk about that because a lot of people have to go through a do-over, but you have a really positive attitude. What is it that makes you so amenable to these do-overs? Because I see a lot of people that worry about these changes. You almost embrace them, Gary.
I actually do. You know, and there was a concept called on-purpose results that I really started thinking about early on, because so many people do things hoping for a result out of whatever that time, effort, money they invest in that. And I wanted a little more predictability. I wanted to track things to say, okay, why do I get a result by doing this effort or this activity? And then out of that, knowing that there's cycles. There's things that are going on all the time that are out of our control, whether it be the economy or whatever it is inside. And after you go through 2 or 3 recessions, you start understanding that just because it's good times, just like winter follows fall and summer, but there's always a spring. And so what is it that people
like
want
Chauncey
in
Gardner being there.
Yes. Well, you know, even after the crash in 1929, the question is are there any less dollars in the economy before or after the crash of 29? And the answer is exactly the same. They just changed hands. And so I love Wayne Gretzky, because when he was asked, how are you always around the puck? If you remember, his answer was, because I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it, is looking at what are the needs, not what I feel the needs are, but what are the needs of individuals or organizations as they're sharing with me. So I call it active listening.
Well, and active listening is very important. You used a term that I was interested in, on-purpose results. Tell us a little bit about what do you mean when you say on-purpose results? You
know, it's starting with the end in mind. And so what we're looking at is, if I want to go to New York City, there's a lot of different ways we can go. We can walk, a bicycle, you know, I don't recommend those. But we could fly, we could take the bus, we could drive. We could go through Los Angeles. If I'm in Denver wanting to go to New York, I could go through LA to get there. It would take me a little bit longer, and I would need to figure out how to get across the water. So some of those elements wouldn't do it. But if I know what that destination is, now I can start predicting what it is that I want as a result for that effort. And it's not that shotgun effect. You are taking efforts and really tracking that process so that you know if you're on target or not. I call it also launch and adjust. How do you know what works or doesn't work outside of letting go? And if you don't let go, you get stuck. And my tagline I've used over the years is, I'm the traction coach.
The traction coach.
It's not my empowerment to you. And so many coaches, I think, over the years, almost take an ownership that it's about them and changing you and giving you that power. Part of my mission statement is to make a difference. And then the second piece
You're on the right show.
There you go. And maybe that's why we became friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to make a difference and then to empower. But it's not my power that I give you. It's helping you find the light switch and connect the power that's already there. So when I leave, you are good.
So as a coach, and even, I guess, as a speaker and an author, how do you help other people get their on-purpose results?
You know, asking questions. Very rarely do I just say, here's the answer, because it's not my answer that's important, it's their answer. And so by exploring what is it that's meaningful to them, what is it that they really want at the end of the rainbow, as you will. Being a financial planner for so many years, I got so callous and jaded with numbers and told people that if the number's too big, subtract a 0. If it's too small, add a 0. In the end, it's all zeros. So what's beyond the number? What does the numbers do for you? What are the opportunities? Is it a charity? Is it your children? Is it a legacy? You know, I believe it was Carnegie when he was asked, how much is enough? And he said, just a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, just a lot, you know, so it's that carrot that always is right there in front of you. You can't quite reach it. And, you know, to me, that's sad, because then you're never fulfilled. You never know. Your external validation is the most important thing instead of that internal validation and truly being able to give yourself away. And so the questions, and people really start exploring things probably for the first time, or something that they haven't connected to since they were little children, and allowing that piece of them to explore anything is possible. And that's where the Beaver book, you know, really comes back in it.
I mean, because I'm getting excited just listening to you again, because I was sharing with you earlier, when I read How a Beaver Saved My Life, it's a great book. I mean, I read a lot of books, Gary, and your book took me less than an hour to read. It's a perfect airplane book, but it's very personal. I get to know you very well. Unlike many authors, your voice really comes through very strongly in your writing. It's very, very easy to read, and then it's very practical. You have some very good action steps for people to take. Let's get back to the book, though, because I want people to know really all about the on purpose. What's your purpose in the book? What do you want the book to accomplish?
You know what's interesting about the book? It was really designed to be the third book out. And every time I was working on the other two books, I was getting mired down, and it just wasn't coming. And so, as a financial planner, I never told anybody the story, because most of the time you don't want to tell a prospect that you have been diagnosed, and that was something else. I have never owned the illness. This is something that's really important. I just really wanted everyone to know that it was a diagnosis, which meant it was someone else's opinion. And so I didn't have to buy in that I was going to be dead or in a wheelchair in 10 years. I could figure something else out. But the book itself really happened. I wrote it in 6.5 days. And I dictated it. And it was very tough for me at times to go back through and relive that experience. But it has become very fulfilling.
Let's go back to that experience, though, because I know a lot of people I'm not going to let that go that quickly.
Okay.
Because you just said, you're diagnosed with MS, but you're not going to own it. Now, how did you do that?
Well, the doctor thought I was nuts. And in fact, my wife is a psychotherapist, and right out of grad school,
she verified it for me.
She verified it, and she had worked with MS patients right out of grad school. And so she really had this picture of what our lives were going to be like in a very short period of time. And so I asked her to leave the room and said, I need to work through this. And the options that he gave me was just basically steroids.
It was one option.
It was one option. And so what I wanted to do is to, number one, I designed my 100th birthday party. I started looking at all of the things that were important to me and wanted to incorporate in my life. And since then, I've climbed 14,000-foot mountains. Even before that, I drove a destruction derby car, I bungee jumped. I just flew a P-51 fighter. I had a professional stock car experience. I keep saying yes. So what is it instead of saying no? One thing that did come back out of that is I love music. I'm a drummer. Now, drummers without feelings in their hands it's called dangerous. And you'd lose a stick. I would lose a stick, and I'd grab it, and people thought I was showing off, and I wasn't. I was just wanting to survive. And so what happened was that I started saying yes to even those type of things and not allowing the illness diagnosis to change my focus. And the focus is really the key, is that whether or not it's an illness within myself or a family member or the economy or a business or whatever it is, what is my focus? And the illustration I use a lot of times is, in Colorado, we are big mountain bikers. And you get out onto a mountain bike trail, there's obstacles in the road. And so let's say there's a stick there, and if you focus on missing the stick, there's like a magnet to that stick with a tire. But you focus, it's almost like that Gretzky, again, you focus to where you want to go, not where you are. And so that's what I did with the illness, is with the diagnosis. And then I just really lived that embracing concept of the beaver. And the beaver has now become my mascot. It's not my identity, but...
Do you have Fred with you? I thought you brought him. Oh, you didn't bring him in.
Yeah, I didn't bring him in.
Darn it.
Yeah, I brought Fred. It's really kind of a funny story as well. I didn't realize all of the different meanings to that beaver story. And all of a sudden, I started receiving beavers in the mail. I mean, the beaver that's on the cover of the book is Big Beaver, a big Buddy Beaver and little Buddy Beaver. There's a little beaver in his arms. And it was the first one that showed up, and a woman had heard me speak, bought the book, and saw this in a store and said, you have to have Big Buddy Beaver. And since then, I've had, particularly one gentleman has sent me a beaver antique top hat. And so we have that, but everything, scarves and socks and buttons.
Episodes of Leave It to Beaver.
No, they haven't done that yet.
There we go. I'm giving people food for thought.
But that embracing that you're not in it alone, and able to focus, and that the reality hasn't happened. And so what is it that is really potentially optimal for me? Now, today, I still have very little feelings in my hands. I have to really pay attention. People say I walk deliberately because I have to. I've only fallen off one stage, you know.
Well, that's great.
And it was live streaming, and the person behind the camera had looked away. I disappeared. He came back, and I was no longer there. He wondered where I went. But so it's about a recovery. But the idea here is that I'm not perfect. It's not something that's a magic bean or a magic bullet. All of a sudden, I cured myself. I think really what happened is I rewired myself because I have different senses now than before the diagnosis. My hand writing my signature is totally different from before the first episode and today. But it's not allowing that obstacle, if you will, to get in my way of where am I going and why am I going there. So many people don't know why.
How do you rewire other people, Gary? Because there's a lot of people, you're a very positive person. I mean, you made this choice right from the very beginning. I know there's a lot of people that are just down on themselves all the time. And it was either your book or your blog, and your blog's fantastic, by the way. You talk about how the worst experience is the moment you meet yourself for the first time. Tell us a little bit about that. What are you doing to help others?
Well, you know, it comes back to their stories many times because people really discount their experiences, where they've already come from, what have they accomplished. And there's a lot more of them than they think there is. Usually when I sit down with a person for the first time, I'll ask them about their story and they go, well, I haven't done anything. And then you find out they were, you know, near the Olympics and they worked with Bill Gates or they, you know, it's like, wow, I can see how that's not important. You know, an astronaut would come over every day, you know, and really, well, that doesn't count. It was a family friend. And I'm going, oh, okay. But having them really connect within themselves that there is value. Because I think we have been, in some ways, I've never really used this term, but dehumanized as a group. Because when I was growing up, there was no I in team. And so when I would start showing the spotlight on myself and saying, this is me, I would feel very awkward and feel like I was really bad. But as I pull this out of individuals, it's not about them per se, but it's about sharing them and finding out what their message is. And there's a process that I really look for, whether it be in a business or as a speaker or whatever it may be, is to get the message out of their head, into their heart, and then out their mouth. And so when they understand this message, now it becomes a mission. And so it transcends whatever it is that they're finding. They'll find a way around it. There's an old story that when you come up against an obstacle, you can get stopped by it, or you can go around it, you can go over it, you can go through it, you can go under it, or just plant your seed right there and, you know, figure that's where your gold mine is. And people just don't see that there's options. And they get stuck very easily because it's, oh, well, it's almost that Eeyore syndrome. Thank you so much, you know, thanks for noticing me. And, you know, and so what happens is that we start buying into beliefs. Over the years, as I've spoken in my coaching clients, they started identifying that I would have these little sayings, and now they become Garyisms. And one of the most important new Garyisms that I've started using in the last few months is facts are stories until they become beliefs.
Oh, I like that. Facts
are stories until they become beliefs. And I get so many people that want to argue that. And I go, well, a few hundred years ago, we all believed that the earth was flat. But is it? About what, even 60, 70 years ago, the smallest thing in the universe was a cell. And then we now have gone into quarks and string theory and, you know, what's going to be next. And so we design our reaction out of the beliefs. But when we understand the beliefs is a story, now we can change the story to create a new belief to have a different result. So there is a cycle here.
Now, we're starting to wind up on time. I knew this would go very quickly. Now, you talk to businesses, you talk to all kinds of different people in your speaking, your coaching, everything, but the most important audience you've had are your sons. How have you modeled this to your own family, to your sons and to your wife?
You know, that's a really great question because that's really the toughest audience because they see you in your all of your foibles, all of your weak points, And for me, it has helped me go back to what I know to be true, even when I'm at my weakest, because it gave me a bumper to come back into the lane. You know, when we bowl, you put the little bumpers in
I like that.
the gullies, and it gets us back to center. But I think the biggest thing is that to let them know that anything truly is possible. And there's been challenges for all three of them that has just watching what I went through. If Dad can do it, I can do it. And now the biggest challenge with the boys, when anything breaks, they don't want to be around you because they don't want to see you, you know, in any kind of compromised. You know, you're in a hospital. They don't, you know, they just don't like seeing that. But and Sharon's the same way. We formed this partner. Now she is totally opposite. If I'm in an airplane or whatever, I'm loving it. If she's doing an exciting weekend, it's quilting. She loves to quilt. But it's allowing each of us to really fulfill ourselves in what's important for us.
So last question before we leave. What's your biggest suggestion to people who want to achieve some kind of on-purpose result? You
know, for me, it's letting go. And letting go of the old beliefs, or at least challenging them, asking the why question. There's a very old story about, you know, a family that was cutting the ends of the ham off, and they had a family dinner, and finally somebody said why, and it came out that great-great-great-grandmother had a pan that if they didn't cut the ends of the ham off, it wouldn't fit. And so sometimes we create things out of not knowing, and so let go, see what the possibilities are, and engage in life.
Wow. Well, you are engaging in life. I mean, how many things you have a whole list of different. You've skydived.
Not skydived.
You haven't skydived yet. Well, I just gave you something else.
Well, my kids are saying I will be.
But you've done, and then you've flown a P-51 fighter,
a B-25H bomber, like 30 seconds over Tokyo.
Well, so basically, you came up with your own bucket list, and you've been fulfilling these. But I mean, your whole life is basically Titanic. After Rose loses Jack, she sees the world and does everything she was never supposed to do.
It really happens, but it's not a bucket list. I just keep seeing opportunities. And when you take the blinders off, the opportunities are there, and that's the key. And people say, "Well, how did you find the P-51 to fly?" And I said, "I looked for it, and just said yes." And whether it be destruction derby or bungee jumping, whatever it may be, climbing a mountain, to me that was a major feat, and it was something that was very fulfilling because you're now on top.
Absolutely. Take those opportunities, let go, and you've got me totally pumped. I'm ready to climb a mountain. Thanks so much for joining us today, Gary. Folks, there are people like Gary everywhere. If you know somebody that you'd like to see profiled on a future edition of People Make a Difference, please email me at danny@dannybrassell.com. That's dannybrassell.com. Until next time, remember, people make a difference every day. You can too. Thanks for joining us, and God bless.